I'm Lyndsey Parker. Welcome to a very, very exciting Facebook Live. I cannot believe I am sitting next to the man, the myth, the comedy legend, the radio legend, and now punk rock legend, Dr. Demento.
Whoa, whoa, wind up your Facebook.
And the man behind making this wonderful album Covered in Punk happen, John Cafiero. Tell us how we remember your last name again?
You can remember how to properly pronounce my name by making a combination of caffeine and Aerosmith, Cafiero.
Those are two of my favorite things, so I know this chat is going to go very well. So obviously the first starting off question would be, and I do want to mention there's so many questions I want to get to, but I will get to fan questions as well, because I know you have a lot of fans out there who want to have so much they want to ask you. But the first obvious question is, like, how did this come together? Like, how did you guys meet? How did the idea for Covered in Punk come about?
Well, it was John's idea. He brought it to me, and I said, oh, that sounds like fun. So let John tell about how the idea happened.
I'll try and condense it for you.
Okay.
Basically, I've been a big fan of Dr. Demento since I'm about 6 or 7 years old, and I'm a big punk rock fan. And then as a teenager into my adulthood, punk rock became not only my way of life, but my career. I'm a manager of some of the most iconic punk bands in the history of the genre. I've worked with both the Misfits and the Ramones for years, and I continue managing the Misfits. I have a band of my own, Osaka Pop Star. And I love outsider music in addition to novelty music. And there's an outsider artist that I really like named Klaus Bayer that I was introduced to by a DJ when I was promoting the first Osaka Pop Star record. And he played for me Klaus Bayer's cover of the Beatles' Help called Helft. Now the whole thing with Klaus Bayer is it was his lifelong mission to cover the entire Beatles catalog in German language. But he has two obstacles. One, he does not sing very well. And two, he did not have the music beds. So he would take little snippets of music from Beatles masters, edit them together to create the music bed, and then sing the song over it. So I loved Klaus's catalog. DJ Erwin Chus had put me in touch with Klaus's manager. I got Klaus's whole back catalog. So now I'm doing interviews for Osaka Pop Star Records and people saying, what are you listening to these days? And I'm saying Klaus Bayer. So then I tell the story, it gets back to Klaus Bayer checks out Osaka Pop Star, and then one day, completely out of the blue, in the mail, I get a Klaus Bayer cover version of an Osaka Pop Star song I wrote called Shaolin Monkeys, given his Beatles treatment. And then his manager asks, can we put this out? And I say, not only can you put it out, I'll give you the music beds for a couple of other Osaka Pop Star tracks I wrote, and we could do an EP, and we'll do it as a co-venture. So that led to Die Schallen Affen EP by Klaus Bayer, covers Osaka Pop Star, which I sent to Dr. Demento, and then Dr. Demento played Where's the Captain, done in German by Klaus Bayer, back-to-back with Osaka Pop Star's original version, but remixed with some sound bites from 60s Captain Crunch commercials. Doc wrote me saying, hey, thanks for sending me this stuff. I liked it. I played it on my show this week. You should listen. And we got in touch. And then maybe 6 months later, I told him about this idea I had for Dr. Demento Covered in Punk. And 4 years later, Dr. Demento Covered in Punk, the Demented Punk extravaganza that it is, has come to life.
Mm-hmm. That is not the story I expected to hear. It's definitely not a story I've heard in an interview before. Very fascinating, though. So what does punk rock mean to you? Because I actually think you are pretty punk rock in the sense of what punk really is, about just doing your own thing.
Well, when I first heard the word, it meant garage bands from the 60s. But then I became aware of this new music from the Ramones and from the Sex Pistols in England that certainly took old elements and made them into a whole new high-intensity sound that yet had some humor to it. And so I played Beat on the Brat by the Ramones and a couple of Sex Pistols songs on my show, which is not the sort of thing people normally expected to hear on my show. But my thought was, it's original, it kind of has a history to it, and it's got a lot of energy, and it's appealing, and it's something different. And people had read, especially about the Sex Pistols, in the news media, so I thought it was kind of almost obligatory for me to let people know how their music actually sounded. So I played God Bless, God Save the Queen.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the one before that, whose name is escaping me.
No worries.
Their first record.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Beat on the Brat because you're very associated in a lot of people's minds in the mainstream with Weird Al Yankovic, and he covers Beat on the Brat in Covered in Punk.
Absolutely. So it's full circle.
It really is.
And the same year that Beat on the Brat came out was the first year that I ever played anything by Alfred Yankovic.
You knew him as before he was weird.
That's right.
So
he was arguably weird back then, but he hadn't started. Yeah, he only started using that name when he got his own show on the college station up at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Well, for people, I'm sure a lot of people watching this do know your connection to him, but for those who don't, you pretty much discovered him. He pretty much.
Yeah. I used to get like 25, 30 tapes every week. And one of the cassettes that came in was this one from Alfred Yankovic, Lindenwood, California. And I put it on, and though it was crudely recorded, probably with one of those little cassette machines with a self-contained microphone, the balance was right. You could understand his words. The words were funny, and he played the accordion, which by itself was new and unusual at that time for somebody young to play the accordion and not a polka, not Lady of Spain or anything like that. He had learned to play the accordion from listening to all the tracks on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John, and he decided, I'm going to teach myself to play rock and roll accordion by learning to play all these tracks. He taught himself. So from there, it was a quick step to him writing his own songs.
That's amazing.
And song parodies, of course.
What was the first song?
The first one was Belvedere Cruising. That was about riding around the streets of his hometown in the Yankovic family car, a Plymouth Belvedere, which at one time was a hot car, but it was, I think their car was about 12 years old by the time he wrote the song, so it was just a big old boat of a car. And but he made up funny songs about it. There were lyrics about other kinds of cars that people drove. The line that got to me, there's something about a comet that makes me want to vomit.
It's a good line.
And then going Belvedere cruising today. And so, and that was good. And then the next song was better. Next song was School Cafeteria, which is an experience everybody has had.
It's interesting because you're mentioning original songs, not necessarily the parodies he's better known for.
Yeah. Oh, I played half a dozen original songs of his before the first parody came. That was My Bologna, of course, and that just took off right away with my audience.
So did you know at that time, I mean, there's other people you sort of discovered to help put on the map, and we can talk about those too, but did you know with Al, like, did you at all predict that he was going to be this Grammy-winning?
Nobody could have predicted that. I mean, I knew he was good, but he very gradually, I think every year or so, he discovered something new he could do. Either it was doing an original song, doing a parody, and then doing a video. It took him a little while to discover that, but once he started doing that, he had it down. And after he did a few videos that other people directed and produced, he started doing his own. Al, his whole life is just kind of soaked in all these things and figured out how to do them himself.
Do you guys still hang out? Besides in the studio doing...
Well, he's out on tour. I think he's in Poughkeepsie today. So.
I believe he tweeted his tour started today. Yes.
Yeah.
But you guys, are you guys in touch?
We're in touch, sure.
Very cool. Yeah. So on Covered in Punk, you mentioned how he did the videos, and one of his biggest videos that kind of put him on the map was Eat It.
Yes.
And that's covered on this album by Shonen Knife, who are super cool. How did you come together, the two of you, curating who was going to cover these different songs?
That was me. I just really chose bands that I thought would be great for the project. I look at this like a musical art project or an ensemble cast of this weird cult movie. So all of the punk bands that are on it, just as the special guest stars, were all people that I thought would really contribute something to the greater patchwork of this record. And I thought Shonen Knife doing a Weird Al song would be great. And the fact that Shonen Knife has a lot of songs about food made Eat It a perfect choice for them, and Naoko from Shonen Knife was familiar with Weird Al. She was not familiar with Dr. Demento because in Japan they didn't have Dr. Demento, but she is now, and she certainly knew who Weird Al was and did an amazing job with Eat It.
There's a few specific tracks I want to talk about on this record. Now, if you do nothing else in your life, the fact that you got William Shatner to do Garbage Man by the Cramps on this album That is a feat in and of itself. Please tell me. I mean, he's known for his Golden Throat stuff. He does these kind of covers before, but this might be the the icing on the cake of his golden cake. How did this come about?
Well, I am a huge fan of William Shatner's musical career. Of course, I like Star Trek, but I'm a bigger fan of Mr. Shatner's music than I am of anything else, and his personality in general. I think he's got a larger-than-life personality. He's got a great sense of humor, and I wanted to hear him doing a punk song. So I pitched him on doing something for this project. He liked the idea, was interested. I gave him a couple of different choices, Garbage Man being one of them, and he gravitated to Garbage Man because he felt that the lyrics gave him something to emote with, which is exactly what he does. And he nailed it. And I absolutely love his performance on this. And a lot of people have said that they feel it's the best track he's done. And I take that as a high compliment because, I mean, he's done some really great stuff. And even coming into it, like, I actually prefer his cover of Common People that Ben Folds produced better than the original version.
Well, I can't go that far.
I mean, I do.
Jarvis Cocker fan, but I do like his version.
And I said, look, I love that version. And he said, well, then let's do something like that. And I don't think that we surpassed the Cramps, but I think we can hang with them.
I'm pretty...
Open that up and show him the picture of Shatner inside there.
Okay, I'm going to do that.
It's sealed.
It's sealed. It's okay. I'll ask you another question while I'm doing
it.
I want to ask you about the Fred Snyder doing Fluffy, and I also would like you to tell me the original story behind the original singer of Fluffy, because it's a pretty fascinating story.
Yes.
You want to start with the original, and then I'll go into Fred?
Let's do that.
Well, she was a teacher, right? Anyway... I've forgotten all the details.
But she was sort of known for being a really terrible...
She was known for... Yeah, I mean, the first I heard of her was when the 45 of Fluffy arrived in the mail. And I just put it right up there with Florence Foster Jenkins and Mrs. Miller and Leona Anderson and other legendary bad singers.
And Gloria was a performance
That's all I
artist.
knew. I mean, then I gradually learned that she was a real person, not necessarily... She deserved to be known for other things besides being a terrible singer, but she was at peace with that.
She was. It's interesting. Like I kind of feel like Dr. Demento's early songs, or the classic songs, kind of were like the original viral songs before we had viral videos, before we had YouTube and social media. These were the things people were sharing with each other and having a laugh over. Do you feel that way?
Very much. Yeah. Very good point there.
Cool. And then how did Fred Snyder come to do Fluffy?
Well, I'll just add really quickly on the story of Gloria Balsam is that Gloria was also a performance artist. So her real name is Cynthia. I won't give out her last name. And she is an attorney in Vermont at these days, Cynthia. But the character of Gloria Balsam was a performance art creation of hers. And Fred... originally, when I approached Fred about doing this record, Fred is a fan of the Dr. Demento show, totally understood where I was coming from, got it, loved it. Fred likes a lot of the same kind of outsider stuff that I do. And I envisioned Fred doing King Tut by Steve Martin. I thought that would have been great for Fred. But
maybe for Volume 2.
Maybe for Volume 2. Maybe the B-52s. Maybe Cindy and Kate join Fred for... I've already got the arrangement in my head.
You're watching this, B-52s. Call.
I mentioned it to Fred actually in a text the other day. When I mentioned this to Fred, he was like, that's cool, but I really want to do Fluffy. And I'm really grateful that Fred prevailed for that, because I wouldn't have thought to do a punk cover of Fluffy. And Fred then made me go even further outside the box than I already was. And I love the creation that we made of it. I tried to take elements of Fred's solo work, along with elements of the B-52s, elements of the original, elements of my punk influences, and then meld them all into one. And I think it really turned out as something very special. And it made the top 10 in Dr. Demento's top 10 voted by listeners of the show, right? It was number 5, I believe, in the top 10.
Awesome.
The two different versions of Fluffy both made my top 10. I think it's the first time I've ever had two different versions of the same song, both in the top 10 the same week.
Very cool. Since I mentioned this thing about the virality, early virality of your stuff, we have to talk about, I like virality, it's a word, I think. We got to talk about Fish Heads, obviously, which is covered on Covered in Punk. But this is, if I'm correct, that is your #1 most requested song of all time.
Right.
And I know Bill Paxton, who, you know,
Yes.
sadly we're actually coming up almost exactly on the 1-year anniversary of his passing. He
Yes.
was in the video.
Yes, he directed the video.
Amazing.
And played the role of the sharp-dressed dude in the opening scene, where I play the homeless person.
Did he actually eat any fish heads? Because I remember they're at the tea party.
Yum.
Eat 'em up, yum. It's like the song says.
Right.
He didn't really, though.
Not in my presence.
Okay, good. But let's talk just about the history of that song and how that song, in a very pre-internet age, just really took off.
They made it up one day in a Chinese restaurant where they had fish head soup on the menu. And this was about 5 years before I met them. They had that song kind of in the backs of their collective head for a long time.
No pun intended.
Recorded a couple of different versions of it. And then one day, as I mentioned with Weird Al, I get a whole lot of tapes every week. And one day a tape arrived, The Vomit Song by Barnes and Barnes. And the station I was with at that time, the much revered KMET in Los Angeles.
I grew up in Southern
Our
California.
#1 rock station at the time, and I was a part of it Sunday night. But the management had a thing about songs about bodily fluids, especially gross and disgusting bodily fluids. They didn't like me playing It's a Gas by Alfred E. Newman, which is full of belches. So that was the one thing. So I knew the Vomit Song would not fly, so I wrote back to Barnes and Barnes, having no idea who they were, and said, I like that song. Do you have any others? Then a week later, another tape comes, and I put it on, and it's Fish Heads, just as you hear it today. And I heard it, and, you know, not only is it a funny song with a really good earworm, both lyrically and musically, but it was very well produced, too.
Yeah.
Art Barnes, Bill Mooney, has a fine studio in his living room, and he knew how to use it. He and Robert Hamer together are Barnes and Barnes, and their stuff always was immaculately produced, as well as funny.
Is your playing it what led to it going on Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of it. Yeah, because it was the most requested song on my show right away. It just immediately took off.
Well, I have to ask, if KMET was not happy with you playing songs about vomit or gas, how did they feel about Shaving Cream, which never actually says any bad words, but
Right.
it's very
So
implied.
they didn't mind that.
Okay, so you got around it for
Right.
that. There's a couple other songs on this album that I want to make sure I talk about, and one is, I understand Adam West is on this album, the late Adam West.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me the story about how he came to be involved in this album, and how long ago did you record this before he passed?
Well, I had already retained Mr. Shatner, William Shatner, for the record. And honestly, I don't know that I've told this full story yet, so you'll get the real full scoop. I was watching a documentary called Starring Adam West, which is directed by James Tooley, who is also Adam West's son-in-law, which I did not know at the time. And it's a great documentary. I'd recommend checking it out. So I was watching this documentary, and I think at one point, Adam West mentioned something about William Shatner, or maybe Fred Westbrook, who was Adam's manager or agent and has since passed away as well, mentioned him. And I thought, yeah, you know, Adam West could do the same kind of things that William Shatner does. He'd be great to do a track. So I contacted Fred Westbrook, which is Adam's agent, pitched him on the idea. Adam and Fred were both intrigued and interested, but concerned and hesitant, not really knowing how this would play out. And I am very persistent and really believe in what I do. And if I think there's any shred of something actually happening, I'm not going to give up. And I persisted. And
You seem like that kind of guy. And I mean that in the best, most complimentary kind of way.
Thank you. It's the only way to make things happen. But you also, I will say this for you kids watching at home, you have to know when to quit too, and you cannot be obnoxious about it. There's a fine line. So I persisted, and they agreed. And then when we did the session, it went so well. I was so flattered that Adam, after the session, and Fred thanked me. Literally thanked me for talking them into it, because they were so pleased with the experience and how well the track turned out. And that was probably a little more than a year prior to Adam's passing.
Oh, wow. And it was The Thing, right?
It was The Thing.
For those, yeah.
A song which I had played on my show since I first went on the air.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a huge hit in 1950 when I was a little kid. The song about the but you never know what it is. It's never revealed. That's kind of the whole hook to the song. In 1950, that record was #1 for 4 weeks.
Wow.
Not just on my show, I was just a kid, but on the big major Billboard pop charts. So
It was kind of the pre-rock and roll, right before Elvis era, right? 1950, yeah.
right.
So you actually have a background in rock and roll that predates your radio
Oh,
show,
yes.
right? Let's talk
And
a
all
little.
kinds of music, sure.
Yeah, you did A&R, and you have some connections to
Yeah,
the
little
band
bit, yeah.
Spirit. Tell me a little bit about your rock and roll background.
Well, I guess the rock and roll part of it is me being a roadie and good friend, first for Canned Heat, which had the Boogie and Canned Heat album, and I'm going up the country, and On the Road Again, sung by Alan Wilson.
I love when he sings that.
Who was at the time really my best friend. So I knew him before the band, and so when he started working out with Bob Hite, the Bear, and they formed this band together. I wanted to, I was very much witnessing the birth of that band, and so they said, well, can you haul some instruments for us? So I was a roadie for a little while.
Interesting.
After they got big, they hired a professional roadie, and then I went back to UCLA and got my master's degree.
So you sort of, yeah, I guess that was probably a good life decision.
Right.
For all,
And then
all involved.
the other band that I did a lot of that sort of work for was Spirit, which their biggest hit was I Got a Line on You in 1969, I believe it was. And they also were people who were friends of mine before the band started. In both cases, I first met them at the Ash Grove, which was a famous folk music club. It was the folk music club in Los Angeles.
It burned down, right?
Yeah, a couple of times.
A couple of times.
Yeah, it did, yes.
I didn't realize it burned down more than
Well,
once.
I'll tell you. The Ash Grove, the owner of that, Ed Pearl, he's still with us, sympathized with many left of center political causes. That created some enmity, and so I think that's why they had 2 fires there. But anyway, it was the place to hear folk music before McCabe's was around. The Ash Grove was the place.
So how did your rock and roll background lead you to one of the most unique careers in radio ever?
Well, okay. The Dr. Demento show, and it was another disc jockey who gave me that name. The obscene Stephen Clean said, here's the short version, you need a funny name too, so why don't you be Dr. Demento? And it stuck.
It definitely did.
And I copyrighted it. But anyway, that
And
started
trademarked it too.
Smart.
That started out on KPPC in Pasadena, an underground progressive station, regular FM, but it didn't play by the rules, shall we say. The disc jockeys could and did play anything they darn pleased. So they brought me in to have a rare rock and roll oldie show, and I would play things from the earlier days of rock and roll, things that people hadn't heard before, things with stories behind them, like the Rolling Stones covered a lot of blues songs. I'd play the original versions by Muddy Waters or Jimmy Reed or whoever. And so I was known for playing rare rock and roll oldies, but novelty records were very much part of that scene, especially in the 1950s, like the Purple People Eater and Transfusion, I'm just a solid mess of contusions, never, never, never gonna speed again, pop the fluid in me, Louis, nervous Norvis.
I am smiling so
Top 10
hard.
hit in 1956.
Very cool.
So that stuff was kind of in my blood. So I would play a couple of those every show, and I'd take requests on the phone, and people would say, well, play some more of those novelty songs, or they'd think of another one that maybe, play the Flying Saucer, another novelty hit from the 50s. So, and the more I played of that kind of thing, the more popular the show got. So I realized, hey, that's something different. Nobody else is doing anything like that. I mean, these novelty records, most people thought that they were junk, that once they dropped off the charts, nobody would ever want to hear them again.
A lot of these songs lasted longer than the serious songs in terms of popularity.
And my show proved that.
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Well, in addition to Weird Al and Barnes and Barnes, there were some other, didn't you sort of break Elmo and Patsy's Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer?
Oh, yes,
Tell
right.
me, how did you come across that song?
It was just a record that came in the mail.
Came in the mail?
Yeah, just in the indie label that produced it first sent it to me. You might like this.
You must have gotten so many things in the mail. Did you sit and listen to everything sent to you?
I tried.
That's so cool. A lot of people just throw it in the bin. You know?
I had to hire an assistant at one point to kind of screen them, but most of the time, and still today, listen to them all. At least if you send me an album or a tape with 20 songs on it, and I don't like the first 5, I can't guarantee I'll hear number 19. But
the fact that you'd get through the first 5 is pretty impressive. There's another song on Covered in Punk that I have to talk about. Okay, so I'm a big Space Ghost fan. I'm also a big Suicidal Tendencies fan. And I'm also a big Dr. Demento fan. I did not think I'd have all 3 of these things in one song, but Brack covers Institutionalized. I'm laughing just saying it. Yes. The fact that this is a thing that actually happened. I need to know the story about this, because this was, if you grew up in Southern California, if you grew up in the 80s, if you grew up with punk, this was, or if you were a punk, this was your anthem. This was your anti-authority anthem.
I'll just say that has turned out to be the real sleeper from the album. And let John tell the rest of the story.
Okay.
Well, the genesis of it is that the Milkmen, who are on this record, when they were choosing their songs and I was coordinating with them on what they would do, Tesco V from the Milkmen initially picked My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama, a Frank Zappa classic. And then for their second track, because we agreed they were going to do 2 tracks, Tesco kept picking things that I felt were, for lack of a better word, too serious or too straight on. And I wanted something a lot more silly and fun and crazy. So I kept rejecting, or I wouldn't say rejecting, dissuading those choices. And then he came back to me and said, what about I Love Beans? And I was like, perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Brack wrote and performed a song called I Love Beans on Space Ghost. So the Milkmen cover it. So then I thought, well, I've set this whole record up like a radio show with different people doing intros and bumpers. So I thought, I've got to get Brack now and have Brack talking about the Milkmen doing I Love Beans. Okay. So I contacted Andy Merrill, who is Brack. I mean, basically, in addition to being the voice, Andy, as you know, you become Brack. I mean, he channels this character.
I don't want to know who does Brack, because that's like telling me Santa Claus does not exist. I don't want to know who the real, in my mind,
well,
Brack
he's
is
real. He is.
Brack is real.
Well, he is real because he exists.
He exists.
So when I'm talking to Brack, or Andy, as I call him. If you know Brack very well, you can call him Andy, his real name. Brack's his stage name.
I don't know Brack as well as you.
So, yeah, so I know him by Andy, his birth name. So Brack and I are talking about him being on the record, and then he says, you know, I would totally be up to doing a song if you'd like me to do a song. And then he mentions that he had done Punk Rock Girl by the Dead Milkmen back when he was doing interviews for Space Ghost. And I tell him Punk Rock Girl's already taken. Philly Boy Roy, John Worster from Superchunk.
That's on the album as well?
Yeah. Philly Boy Roy had done a cover of Punk Rock Girl that there's a lot of connections with, which we could talk about later. So basically, Andy was naming different songs, and I was like, that's cool, that's cool. And then he was like, what do you think about Institutionalized? And I was like, you've just struck gold. We have to do this. Because I'm imagining these lines in my mind like, we decided my best interest. How can you know what my best interest is? How can you say what my best interest is?
When I went to your schools. Yeah, okay, we don't have to do the whole song.
Your churches. So as soon as he mentions it, I'm like, oh my God. And I literally said, you have just struck gold. We have to do it. So we set out, and Brack and I collaborated and created this version of Institutionalized by Brack that has become a fan favorite on the record. And Brack and I are talking about doing a whole album now.
Oh, my stars. I want to make sure we get a couple questions or comments from your fans here. This isn't so much a question, but Linda says, Dr. Demento, hi, I used to listen to you every weekend. We can still listen to you, right? You're on the internet.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Because everyone grew up with the radio show, but times they do a change.
Well, I do it online now. We stream online. New show every Saturday. Plus, we have a great many older shows available. Amazing. And you can find it all at drdemento.com.
Have you found yourself getting a lot of younger fans rediscovering the old shows through the internet?
We have, yes.
Yeah.
And, of course, the old fans, too.
Yeah.
So new show every Saturday, but you can hear it any time. There is a small fee because we have to pay royalties and keep the lights on, but it's really a bargain price.
There was one station here in L.A., I forget, a few years ago, I'd say around like 2009, they did a whole day where they replicated KMET's programming, and they played a bunch of your shows.
Yeah, the sound.
It was the sound.
May it rest in peace.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
the sound is gone.
Yes.
Sorry to bring up that sad point. Another, and actually Anthony said the doctor needs a new show on radio or TV. Do you think that will happen? Or are you just sticking with the internet
Just
now?
maybe. I mean, John and I will certainly kick that around a bit.
We've talked about the possibility of doing something on TV, and you never know.
Yeah.
Well, that actually, Christopher has a question that sort of ties into that. He says, hi, Dr. D and John. Any chance for some covered in punk live concert events?
Yes, I really have, from inception of the record, thought that would be great. I would love to do it. The biggest obstacle is that it's such an ensemble cast. To have 30 bands do a tour where each band only comes up and does one song would be logistically impossible. But I do want to try and work something out, even if it's maybe just one big show in New York, Chicago, LA, that kind of thing, and make the most of it. And maybe there's a house band that serves and the different vocalist comes in. So yes, there is. It's something I'd really like to do, and hopefully we can make that happen for you, and we'll see you there.
Kenneth says, or sorry, not Kenneth. Kenneth actually has a comment. He says, in my youth, I listened to a lot of your shows. Now I'm in Sweden. Cool to see you. You reached Sweden.
Yeah.
Whole world.
The land of my ancestors.
Awesome. Will wants to know. He says, I love the Good Doctor's outfit. It's iconic. How did you choose that look?
I went to the Grammys and I rented a tux. And my manager at the time saw me dressed up in the tux and said, you need to wear that for your stage shows. So pretty simple as that. I've been through about 6 or 8 of these top hats and who knows how many outfits, but yeah, it works for me.
What Grammys was that?
Oh, it was back in the late 70s, I think. It was.
Were you there as a guest or presenter? Were you?
I had joined Neris, so
Okay.
I was just in the audience.
Oh, so do you vote now when Weird Al's up for? He's won like
I
5
did
Grammys now.
I voted for some of them.
Yes, well deserved, well deserved. Denny wants to know. He says, glad to see a Dead Milkmen song made the CD. So he wants to know the details behind the Dead Milkmen track.
Okay, so I thought Dead Milkmen a perfect choice for this project because Dead Milkmen have the duality of being a punk band that's actually been played on the Dr. Demento show. And Dead Milkmen are a great punk band, and I just thought, got to approach them. I did, and Joe Gennaro and I spoke about it, and the whole band was into it. They're fans of the show. They loved the idea, and they chose Lydia the Tattooed Lady. They immediately picked the song they wanted to do and rocked it. And then when the Dead Milkmen were on the comp, John Worster from Superchunk, and he also plays in Bob Mould's band, and he plays drums in my band as well, Osaka Pop Star. Not on the tracks on this record, because I have a couple of different lineups. Dennis Dykin from the Smithereens plays drums on the Osaka tracks here. So I knew that John was the local paper boy for the Dead Milkmen in the 80s. And there's a song on the same album as the punk rock girl, Beelzebubba, called Stewart, where they make a reference to that little Johnny Worster kid in the neighborhood. So knowing that John has a character called Philly Boy Roy that is like totally pro-Philly, and, you know, Punk Rock Girl is known for, and the Dead Milkmen are known for their Philly accent in their songs, I thought, well, to have that little Johnny Worster kid embody Philly Boy Roy doing Punk Rock Girl and have that precede or follow the Dead Milkmen track would really be a great little connection. So we did. So we've got the Dead Milkmen and Philly Boy Roy, and the Dead Milkmen gave permission for some of the changed lyrics in Philly Boy Roy's cover version, and they loved it.
Amazing.
And then they came on and did Groucho Marx
Yes.
themselves.
What's that?
The Dead Milkmen covered Groucho Marx's song Lydia the Tattooed Lady.
Very, very cool. So I want to ask about another song. The lights came on because...
Oh, they were out?
I don't know. It got a little brighter in here. Okay, so we've talked about Weird Al. He obviously was famous for covering I Love Rocky Road, which is not originally done by Joan Jett, but famously done by Joan Jett. And Joan Jett is on... See, I'm trying to be circular and make it all come together.
That's cool.
Joan Jett...
There we go. I love that mood lighting.
The mood lighting's back.
This is great.
I thought they were trying to tell us to leave. I'm like, no, I'm not ready to go. Okay, so Joan Jett is on this record, and she does the Rocky Horror Picture Show theme. And my understanding is this actually was recorded a while ago, but never saw the light of day until this album. So what is the story behind this track?
Okay, well, funny you should mention I Love Rocky Road, because I originally pitched Joan on covering I Love Rocky Road, because I thought, how cool would it be to have Joan Jett, to have Joan Jett do I Love Rocky Road, and Kenny Laguna, who's been Joan's longtime collaborator and manager, laughed when I said that and said, John, no way Joan's going to cover I Love Rocky Road. So you got to know when to not push. Yeah. So I knew, okay, that's not going to happen. And incidentally, Kenny Laguna, who's produced a lot of Joan's stuff and co-writes with her and performs in the band, he produced a novelty song years back called Stairway to Gilligan's Island. So he understands where I'm coming from. So I started throwing out names of different songs that I thought Joan might like and that Joan would sound good on, one of them being Science Fiction Double Feature from the Rocky Horror Show. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge Rocky Horror fan. I know that Joan is as well, and she played Columbia in the Broadway production in the 2000s. So when I got to Science Fiction Double Feature, Kenny went, oh, you'd like Joan to cover Science Fiction Double Feature? Well, she actually recorded it right around the time that she did the play. And it's a great version, but she's just never released it. So I'll play it for you, and if you like it, then we'll give you this. So they played it for me, and I was blown away, and I was just thinking, how could you have not released this? I'm so lucky to have it. There's no point in re-recording it. This is perfect. So that is the only track that had been recorded prior to the record, but it hadn't been released.
Amazing.
So we didn't get Rocky Road, but we got Rocky Horror.
I still would have loved for that to happen. Even just, it'd be really funny if Weird Al ever did a compilation album of the original artists, like Coolio doing Amish Paradise,
Yeah.
Weird Al, if you're watching this, if you're in Poughkeepsie or wherever you're at.
Or send your cards and letters to Joan, and maybe Dr. Demento Covered in Punk Volume 2.
I would die. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I want to just wrap up asking you a couple questions about some of your illustrious rock and roll past. Were you friends with Frank Zappa, or what was your connection to Frank?
Well, I met him actually before the first album came out.
Oh, wow.
The first Mothers album. And we had a fascinating conversation. I think I might have been the first person he ever met who could talk with him intelligently about, on the one hand, avant-garde classical music, the most avant-garde music of that time, that being the 70s, or 60s rather. And then on the other hand, street corner doo-wop music from the 50s.
Really?
Those old scratchy records that Frank loved, he got them when he was growing up, and these funky little groups, sometimes with just a guitar behind them, doo-doo, me, I love you so, and all that sort of thing. And I enjoyed both of those kinds of music, and Frank's music is kind of a synthesis of those two very different elements, along with half a dozen or a dozen or 100 other things. Yeah. That's Frank. So we got to know each other, and then I had him as a guest 4 times on the show.
Oh, wow. Later
on, he got to be much more guarded because he got involved in so many lawsuits, and Frank was a genius. I called him, I wrote a review for Rolling Stone of his 3rd album, and I wrote Frank Zappa is the supreme genius of rock music today. Rolling Stone toned it down. But anyway, so I wrote that. So I just had tremendous awe and respect for him. But he was the most litigious person that I ever met, certainly.
Not against you?
No,
not against you.
Against
just in
me.
general. Yeah.
I mean, I worked for Warner Brothers Records for a while. That was my day job while the show was kind of feeling its legs, feeling its oats. And Frank had some legal disputes with them. So.
I see. And there's a Spinal Tap memory that I believe I would like to ask you about.
Well, they were on my show once.
Didn't you do some very epic interview with them? I've read.
Well,
I need to maybe go on drdemento.com and try to find it.
Oh, well, real early on, I had the same manager as the Credibility Gap, which included people Harry Shearer in particular, who would go on, who would go on to be part of the Spinal Tap ensemble.
Amazing.
So
I'd like to believe that you somehow in some way planted the seed for Spinal Tap.
Maybe
just
so.
With your comic genius of your own.
Well, I'm sure I nourished it in the early days. Because Harry and I did work for the same station for a while. So,
very cool.
And bounced things off each other. And we both had Warner Brothers connections, too.
Right. See? My theory holds up.
Okay.
Yes, very okay. My last question is, do you get any feedback from younger artists now, not just the ones that are on this album, but just in general, who say that what you did, growing up listening to your radio show, in any way inspired them? Do you have any stories?
Well, yeah, we've been trying to make a documentary about my life for a while, and hopefully it will see the light of day. We're making plans. It's been tied up. I won't go into all that, but anyway, Jimmy Fallon, for instance, was interviewed for my show, and he also wrote about this for Vanity Fair. He was a huge fan of my show when he was a kid, certainly helped shape his taste in comedy. He had his parents buy him a reel-to-reel tape recorder just so he could record a whole Dr. Demento show on one piece of tape. And we also talked to Jack Black. He had some marvelous things to say about growing up with me. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
That absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, we do need to wrap this up, but it has been an honor to talk to both of you. It's been a childhood dream.
Wrapped up. I'm already covered in punk.
You
need
are.
to wrap me up.
Covered in Punk is out now. It's pretty awesome for all the songs we talked about and other ones. Thank you again so much. If you do that concert in L.A., I'm going to be in the front row, and Joan Jett needs to be there singing the Rocky Road. I'm just saying.
Send your cards and letters, kids.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. This is amazing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Check